Michael Kevner. I know I was just here with somebody who looked just like me was stepped up here. My evil twin.
I'm not your evil twin.
And no heckling from the audience, please, Bianca. Okay, so welcome, Laura Lee Bennett. I used to be on the RASP board. I used to come here a lot, and I'm very happy to be back here tonight and welcoming our featured reader, Paul Hunter. So what I'd like to propose, a lot of you have signed up for open mic. What we're going to do is the featured reader first, and then a short Q&A, and then a break, or maybe some announcements, and then the second half will be our open mic. So I'm just going to start out with a poem, not mine, from, some of you may recognize this from 2014, the RASP Literary Anthology, Literary Arts Anthology, Here, There, and Everywhere. And this is a poem by Catherine Grace Bond, one of our lovely past instructors and teachers and readers. It's called On Poetry and Other Irritants. Honestly, what's the point? If you have to say something, say it. Don't marinate it in saucy words and chop up your phrases like sad radishes. You poets annoy me. Always have to be so clever. No one understands what you're saying. No one cares. What's to be written that's more important than bus stop, exit, mini-mart, donuts? I can look at clouds as well as you can. Conch shells, tree sap, whippoorwill, all of that. So, just stop it. You're peering at light and shadow. You're hanging backwards over stone benches. You're listening for when dusk becomes twilight. You write as if you're going to die. I'm sure Catherine's getting a chuckle wherever she is. Okay, so what I'd like to do is riff a little bit about our featured reader tonight, Paul Hunter. His poems and stories have appeared in numerous journals, as well as 9 full-length books and 4 chapbooks. His first collection of farming poems, Breaking Ground, published by Silverfish Reed Press, was reviewed in the New York Times and received the 2004 Washington State Book Award. A featured poet on the NewsHour, Hunter published his autobiography in prose poetry, Clownery, in 2017, and 2 Western novels, Sit a Tall Horse and Mr. Brick and the Boys. I believe many of his books are out there for sale. In 2020 and 2022, from Davila Art and Books, Sit a Tall Horse won a Will Rogers Medallion Award in 2020. On a personal note, I first met Paul Hunter in the 1990s at a Bumbershoot book fair. He had a table full of letterpress books and broadsides. Some of those same broadsides have graced my fridge for decades. His manner was friendly, but kind and fierce. And I knew at once that he was a storyteller and a friend. What I did not know, but learned through the years, was that he has acted as a kind of celebrant for poetry and local poets, honoring their lives, their works, and their passings. He exhorts us to read one another's work, to support one another, to grow and share, to offer what we know and write and express, which is always worth another look. Paul's work is filled with hard-bitten observations and language keyed to the farmers of the American land. In a 2004 New York Times book review of Breaking Ground, his first book of farming poems, and I quote, Hunter shows his command of a speech-based free verse learned from William Carlos Williams, using its accents in gritty accounts of determination and endurance, as shown by rural people and the animals they tend. Yet in these gritty accounts, there is music and intelligence in the language itself, and the poet himself observes that it could be the language that we're working with is somehow smarter than we are. Please welcome Paul Hunter.
Yes. A poem first. This is the voice of a 40-year-old woman who has 4 children, talking about her dog. Frida wasn't much as German shepherds go. A devout coward with great big donkey ears that never would stand up or learn a thing. But she was mine. I picked her out. And she was good with the kids. What more can you expect? So when she got old and lame and blind and incontinent and was in pain all the time, Jerry always said that he would put her down. But he could never quite bring himself to get around to it. And of course I couldn't, so one day I called the vet to run in town to get it over with. But when I got there, I couldn't watch and sat in the waiting room behind a magazine crying my eyes out. And when it was done, he put her in a plastic garbage bag to bury back on the farm where she belonged. But as usual, when we get to town, I have this big long list to run around. But with that poor dog in the back, I couldn't think of what to do and put my head down on the wheel. But then, right there on my arm, I had this brand new digital watch that came without instructions how to set. And the dumb thing was all wrong. And the store was just around the block. So I take it in, and the owner comes to wait on me himself, and he can't find instructions either. He can't seem to make it work. And while he pokes around and fools with it, of course, I'm no big help. I can't stop crying. Which rattles him no end. And he keeps saying, there now. Don't take it so hard. We'll make it right. It's just a watch. Which I know is wrong, but can't stop and set him straight. And that poor man, I sometimes think he should have never been in business. Had too soft a heart, because he finally reaches in the till and gives my money back and makes me keep the watch, which still runs good as new, though I never have quite figured out a couple things he said it's supposed to do. The purpose of that really was to tell you that every single goddamn thing I write, I want you to laugh and cry. Every single thing. I don't even do it if I don't want you to laugh and cry. You know, that's a hard, and I usually fail. And if you don't laugh, then I'll know I failed. And if you don't cry, I'll maybe know I failed. You're a better mug than I have. Anyhow, Clownery, 2017 it was published. And I had been writing it for about 4 years and posting every day on my Facebook page. And if you're around and some of you know me from my Facebook page. And I'm still writing it. I'm still writing the same thing. It's now the Clownery miscellany file is now 169 pages long. I just checked it this morning. And so if there is ever anybody who goes, God damn, that's a good book, and somebody says, well, I don't want to print it, you know, again, you could make a monster. Here is, I need to explain a few things, you know. That was me explaining Clownery. And I'm going to read a few pieces of it, but I want you to hear this. This is one I wrote night before last and was posted yesterday. In the middle of the night, he woke, remembering his father shouting at his teenage brother, "You are grounded forever!" All those years later, he suddenly saw in that phrasing and that accent how his father, in a drunken rage, had slipped into the Texas accent of his own drunken, raging father. He had never made his father, he had never made his father mad enough to pronounce such a doom, unimaginable to a boy of 14. But his brother had. Forever. They could hardly imagine 2 weeks ahead. No. These cowboy stories, first two books, are set in Texas as the Hunters. The Hunters came out to Texas after Samuel Hunter was in the War of 1812. They were very early. My great-great-great-grandmother danced with Sam Houston at his inaugural ball. They're in there, and they're deeply in there. And my grandfather only left Texas. He left Texas because his father was shot on a day after Christmas, 1892, and died the next day. He was acting sheriff in this little town of Wills Point, which is a little suburb of Dallas now, but it was a little whistle stop on the train line. And my grandfather, as a boy, you know, they put him to work right away. And I am telling pieces of my family story in some of these novels, as well as I can get the facts. I'm telling. But let's go to Clownery from just a page, just a taste. His parents took the little clown to his first circus, where the real show was a sideshow, not so noisy and up close. There was a lady braiding her long beard, and a tattooed man who had scribbled all over himself with colored inks, even behind his ears, between his fingers and toes. And a man with no arms, who sat in a crooked high chair, who made his bare feet work like hands, took out papers and makings, rolled a cigarette that he lit with a pack of matches with his toes, reached up and took his wallet out of his shirt pocket, took out a dollar bill, folded it 4 times into a tight little square, unfolded it, put it away. But the greatest thing was the elephant. His parents gave him a peanut to feed it, showed him how to hold his hand out flat. But it wasn't like feeding a donkey that could bite. Here the elephant stood bigger than a tent, practically big as the sky, and reached down with her nose like a leather fire hose with hairs and a lip at the end of it that snuffled at him and his hand, then curled its lip and plucked a peanut, took it all the way up to her mouth. And while the little clown watched, this great wrinkly thing flapped its ears and with one huge dark eye watched him back. They were standing behind a rope, and the elephant had a chain around one ankle that went to a truck axle pounded through sawdust down into the dirt. But that was nothing. the elephant could just walk off, and his parents and everyone else here were helpless as he was to stop it. So while he shook with fear and wonder, he fed it more peanuts. He was watching his dad draw a horse. Now, horses run way in for me. That's why I wanted to explain. He was watching his dad draw a horse. They sat at the kitchen table late one Sunday morning after church. This horse was the only thing his dad liked to draw. The one thing he gave himself up to completely, took his time, got into every detail, and always drew the same one. The little clown could almost feel the velvety nostrils and lips quiver under the soft pencil, the teeth chomp, the twitchy ears swivel in all directions that showed both the horse's mood and what it was listening to. Each muscle of the neck and chest and legs, the hooves that were heavy and light, the still pool of the dark liquid eye. The little clown had a hobby horse with the exact same head nailed to its broomstick, the same nose and chin, the same fine eyelashes. Though it appeared under the Christmas tree with other presents from Santa, he could tell where it was from if he just thought a minute. It was the one thing his father seemed to love enough to look at that long and that close that he would share. My father was a neurosurgeon. The next one, next to his dad's drawings, his own were scratches. His horse was a potato that grew a long nose and a saddle like warts. He'd carve a bridle onto its head like a cage. His pencil couldn't yet speckle the horse's tongue, shade the cheeks and fetlocks and knees, couldn't comb the mane or fluff the tail. It's like his dad's pencil was touching an invisible horse ever so lightly that the touches would slowly make visible. His dad never drew bridle or saddle or harness. His horse ran free. But was it even a real horse? It was the horse he kept stabled in his mind, knew and cared for, went to over and over, but but for his drawings nobody else got to see. Taste. We sit a tall horse means it's one of the ways that on a ranch the people know who's the boss. The tallest horse. Sit a tall horse. It means you sit up straight. It means you've got a big horse anyhow, and you're taller than anybody else, and there you are, right? That's it. Sit a tall horse. This is a book about a guy whose father dies on his 11th birthday. Coming home. The guy manages an auto repair place, and he's got a bicycle, a brand new bicycle for his 11-year-old son in the trunk of the car, and the railroad sign doesn't come down. The arm is faulty and doesn't come down, and he gets hit by a train and he dies. And as with my grandfather, everybody in his family, the children in his family, are farmed out to relatives while mom scouts a new husband. But it doesn't work. Those things usually don't work. And in my book, of course, I use that wonderful phrase, she was getting a little long in the tooth. You know that? Long in the tooth. Anyway. Now, I just want you to hear a little. I want to The way we tell its poetry is if at a certain point we are lifted. If we hear the fragrance of the horn as Miles goes off. That's how we tell. And prose can be like that. Prose can rise on its tiptoes and just fly. Vagabundos. There were 2 speckled live hens tied together with twine by the claws, slung upside down across the taller vaquero's saddle horn as they rode into the yard. Maybe he was no taller, just a taller hat, sat a taller horse, or sat up straight. Clearly the leader, a little older and a touch more serious. The chickens would occasionally panic and flutter. One would start up, then both swirl a miniature blizzard that soon wore itself out and fell quiet. Maybe it was just to save their strength. Or maybe they went limp with despair or forgetting. Neither of the horses seemed much bothered by these dusty, feathery outbursts, though the smaller rider grinned. Out with a bucket of kitchen slops for the pigs, I watched the 2 vaqueros approach with the thought I might be seeing freshly stolen dinner on the hoof. Buenos dias. I raised my hand in greeting, said buenos dias in return. Por favor, do you know of a place, un campamento, where we might rest for the night? Here on the Lazy Bee, it was only late morning. Their gear was timeless, worn and mended. The bridles and reins of both horses had been pieced together, pieced and patched, stitched and riveted. The cantle of the younger vaquero's saddle was worn away to the wood. Both had bedrolls and slickers and saddlebags, the taller one with a small satchel tied on behind him, while the younger had a cotton flour sack. The one without the chickens also had a fair-sized pot hanging off his rig, ringing against a little metal something I couldn't see. I eyed the near chicken, who for the moment eyed me back. I pointed out the dusty gravel lane they had just ridden in and said, "You turn left out on the road. There's a cottonwood grove to the west by the big bend in the creek. Not far, 1.5 miles. You're welcome to camp there. Muchas gracias." "You must have come from the east." "Verdad, that is so. Do you mind me asking how you come by the chickens?" At sunup, we came upon some cows out along the road. We drove them back in, found the fence post had rotted and fallen, so we set it back up and braced it. The old couple who came out to watch us caught up these birds and offered them as a gift. "They're fine-looking birds." "Yes, a shame we have no safe way to keep them." Then the taller one with the chickens said, "The water there, what is it like?" "The horses will like it. A little muddy, but sweet." With that, the 2 men said gracias again, nodded and waved, then turned their horses and headed back out toward the road, still quiet and hidden from the yard. I wondered which neighbor the chickens had come from. They wouldn't last too long on the road in the hot sun, so it must have been one of the near neighbors and only a short while ago. I kept thinking about them as I did my chores, scrubbing the pans and dishes from breakfast, then helped to burn the cook get supper going, hobbling around on his broken ankle in a walking cast. But I kept thinking about those 2 men, so polite and straightforward, yet private. I felt a little guilty, suspecting they might be thieves. So after I peeled and chopped and had things set for supper, I took a break, put a handful of carrots and potatoes and onions and a stick of butter in a paper bag. Said, "I'm going out to give Cindy a ride." That's his horse. Then I went to the corral and saddled my mare. She was glad to see me and made a show of inspecting my pockets. I broke her off a chunk of carrot and walked her through the gate, closed it, and stepped up. We gathered ourselves, rode out the drive to the road and headed west. And 20 minutes later, down at the bend in the creek, there they were, both horses unsaddled and staked out. The leader was sitting with his back against the largest old tree, drawing in a sketch pad. At least that's what I thought he was doing. I'd never seen a real person do that, who wasn't a school teacher or a kid with a crayon. The other man was downstream a couple hundred yards. I couldn't see for sure what he was doing. Buenas tardes. He looked up, smiled, and nodded. I stepped down and tied Cindy to a nearby tree. Then I brought my paper bag along, walked over to the man, and introduced myself. I forgot my manners earlier. My name is Ben Wilder. He looked up but didn't move. He put his hand to his chest to say his name. Hernan Gonzalez. I bent down to shake his hand and said, I brought you some things to go with your chickens. I work with the cook on the place. When I handed him the bag, he slowly opened it and shyly peeked in and smiled for the first time. Said, gracias. Said, Rodrigo is plucking the chickens. He pointed downstream to where I could see the other man crouched over something. Do you mind if I see what you are drawing? Hernan turned his sketch pad to show me. I hunkered down for a look. There were half a dozen sketches of the two chickens on the first page he showed, starting with one of the pair hanging upside down from his pommel with the twine at their ankles. Then came several of them confused and dazed on the ground together, looking around, getting their bearings, each still with the knotted twine on one foot, tethering to the other bird. Then several sketches of them calmly pecking at small bugs and plants underfoot. The sketches became a trail of little moments in their lives. The two birds were shaded and touched by the soft, dark pencil, like shadows that reached out and led back to his own dark eye. The last drawing showed a complicated dance of awareness. Each of the birds was watching what the other was finding, even as she hunted for herself. Between them was a wordless little dialogue, questions flung back and forth. What are you finding? Is there something better hiding there? I nodded and looked at him. These are very fine. Alive. Hernan nodded, smiled, said, but now they are no more. Only moments gone. Now all we have are scribbles and supper. With that, he looked up at Rodrigo, now standing a few steps off, holding these two plucked hens by the claws, each headless neck still dripping faint pink drops on the gravel. Standing there with the naked bodies, he seemed nearly as young and oblivious as I felt at 17. I'd like to read you the whole book from there on. I just want you to feel that this is that man. I got this award it's like a Big Mac made out of metal, and it's got a big head of Will Rogers, but he didn't have a big head. He was a good man. He was a cowboy.
Yeah.
Read the newspaper on stage for people. Anyway, Mr. Brick and the Boys was the next one. And Mr. Brick and the Boys is about an old guy who thinks is done. He's done. He's done with living. He's done with the world. He's done. His wife dies suddenly, young, missing. He's missing her. He's got a bunch of acres that he bought from his barber. He's got 1,200 acres that the barber owned. The barber is my actual barber. Was my actual barber for a long, long time. Wally, triple bypass Wally. I think I even call him Wally in the book. But Wally had one thing he loved to do. He built experimental airplanes.
Oh.
And he wasn't able to give anyone else a ride in them because no one will insure you, right? You have the license says experimental airplane, and if you designed it and you built it, and he's a barber. And the reason I went to him is because of our talks about World War II, because he was in the Pacific, in all the same areas my father was in. He didn't really know that, but here he was. And he said Wally spent most of his time in the brig. Because he had trouble with authority. And that's why he had a one-chair barber shop. And I have captured in this book a one-chair barber shop. Anyway, now we're gonna get to the hard part. From about 26 to 2011, there was a 5 to 6 year drought in Texas. That was the worst it's ever been. And that's in recent memory here. And I was following that drought. I was reading reports about it. I followed it for the 5 years. And so this is compacted. This is called mud puppies. And this guy's he's got 2 cowboys who work for him, and he can't pay them anymore because he doesn't have any means of income, because all the cows, everything that got planted died. That was when every trick got tried, every hope that still lay in good breeding stock, or what some had mixed in with hardy old longhorns and mustangs. I found a young doe dead in the far pasture that had a mouthful of cactus spines, so stuck so tight she'd starved to death. The next night I went out with a lantern and cut a wagon load of that same cactus, then singed all the stickers off next morning with a blowtorch, careful not to miss a one. I hacked it all up with a machete to feed the heifers, those few of the best I had left. The cattle actually ate it, though it was a feed the skinny horses still wouldn't touch. That was when ranchers and farmers started going out after dark, mowing and baling the median and shoulders along the freeways. It was a desperate move. But everybody knew by now it was that or nothing. The state troopers and deputy sheriffs showed up, but just waved the traffic around us, let us be, shared our coffee, and like the old song goes, never said a mumbling word. Along in there one morning, I was sitting in the shade in the open mouth of the barn, cleaning and oiling the saddle I hadn't used in months, with only those two good mares left, studying some mud daubers huddled around a splash of water under the nearby well spigot. I'd always liked those skinny black wasps that seemed a little sleepy but deliberate, ticking and twitching like each was an old wind-up clock. They were mostly loners, forever busy and quiet, never offered to sting me or bother anything. But this morning, they seemed a little fired up, in more of a hurry to mix the mud and get to laying their eggs and catching a spider or moth to wall in with the baby-to-be. Most of these little mamas were toting balls of mud up under the eaves of the barn overhead, building their parallel tubes in the joints where the roof planks met the wall. They usually did good work, and I usually admired how they did it. But today, saw they had mostly quit and went back to checking the spigot. The puddle was drying up. The air was so hot and dry, the mud would crumble and crack before they could even smooth it out. What could they do about that? Some predator might find a crack and get in. Their eggs might cook and never hatch. So I set the saddle aside, went over and ran the spigot enough to make them a serious puddle, 6 feet across, and wired an old umbrella up over it, which stopped me and them mud daubers moping a minute and got us all back to work. Skip a second, just to give you. He has a little book that he's keeping all this stuff in. But for the last couple of years of the drought, we hadn't stirred the dirt or planted a thing in the fields. And there was nothing standing up for itself out there but a smattering of weeds. Then when everyone had about given up twice over, out of what looked like a clear but faded blue sky, the rains came. And when the rains came, they came hard. It rained a year's worth in half an hour, and that went on for weeks. As with most of the cowhands around here, that first day I just stood out in the rain, whooping and hollering, getting soaked to the skin. Ronaldo and Clyde came out of the bunkhouse laughing with me or at me, I didn't care, and we cut a little buck and wing skipping around in the puddles. But before I got back to the house, my old everyday boots had about fell apart. My soles would need to be glued and stitched back together, but I wasn't likely to forget and got busy storing up what I could, preparing for the next dry spell that might start up any minute. But these rains and storms didn't just ease in, they slam banged and knocked everything flat. They had soaked everyone and everything that ran outdoors to be blessed. The roofs of barns and houses, gas stations, churches, and feed stores all leaked. All their shingles and seams in the heat had long ago shriveled and split. A hardware store had no buckets for customers. They had to set out every brand new bucket in stock to mine their own dribbles. So it took a while to mop up. But after a few weeks, it was like the drought had never been. A 5-year drought that had mostly been a stretch of nothing but heartache. In the flinty, cracked hard pan, no crops would take, none at all, no matter how fine we harrowed it. Got so we never made a move if there was any wind at all. It would just lift up and blow off what was left of the dirt. For the last 2 summers, we didn't stir or plant a thing, left the weedy, hard pan alone. Now, the next thing that happens is his father calls him up. And his father and his grandfather, who's dead now, his father and his grandfather owned a couple thousand acres. Or no, I mean a couple of 100 square miles. And they had taken the oil money. They had sold the rights under the place, and now all they had was what do they call those things? Dude ranch. They had a dude ranch. They had nice little cabins, and they had a dude ranch. And here's their son, who has got this rock hard commitment to things. He's also a Vietnam vet. And he says the old man wanted to talk to him. And the old man finally opened up about always doing what his father, my grandfather, wanted. And when it came down to the oil, he'd known it was just how money talked tough to old age, nothing left, nothing else. Making it all sound so easy, just sit back and cash the checks. Now, with the old man gone to his reward just after months he was asking what I thought. I told him I thought we were really in for it. This climate change was real and worldwide and would make it hard to raise cows or do much of anything sensible with summers all sun and no rain, with range fires on the loose. It was going to take a lot more than luck to get through, and no mistake. His father wants to go to the racetrack. My father, in his old age, started buying and investing in racehorses. And each one, to campaign 25, 30 years ago, each of them cost $20,000, $30,000 a piece to campaign. He only had one horse that ever made any money. That's my dad. When we got to the track, Dad was still kind of worked up, but still not saying much. The sky had gotten dark, like it was fixing to bust a good one. But then in the first race of the day, with the horses halfway around the track on the far stretch, it cut loose, rumbling and flashing a couple good licks. Then the sky opened up and down it came. We were in covered seats under a leaky roof ourselves, and all at once were soaked to the skin, and both laughing. Most horses at the track looked fancy and fussy in all their colors and rigs. Jockeys dressed head to foot in bright silks. But here, all at once, they were what as a kid I'd call mud puppies. All the same mud color, hard to read their numbers or tell the jockeys' colors. Everything a brown movie that swirled and flitted and flashed by in the home stretch. Their ears back, noses out, necks stretched, eager and running wide open. Happy mud puppies. Some horses like to run in the rain and the mud, and some don't. Some are mudders, some aren't. A rain can change the odds on everything. Some are set for it and run strong in the mud. Some slip and slide and get cautious. Some don't. But today, these all looked happy, whether first or last. They've been through the drought too. Took the wet for the blessing it was and knew what was what. We hadn't even bet on this first race, because we were still fighting the drought, a million miles off in our heads. But then we bought a racing form, and for the rest of the day, bet all mudders. And the good ones mostly won, as we knew they would. I saved a couple poems to choose for the last, if we get to that point. But I'm gonna only pick one of these two. Let you hear what I am actually working on now, right now. This is called Desert Crossing. This is just a little chapter. And the chapter is about he's got his horse Straighter. His horse is named Straighter, just like it kind of fits in because he stands up straighter than any other horse. He's always looking down at everything. Anyhow, and he meets a woman. There's this bunch of there's this dude ranch, and there's a bunch of these greenhorns that are riding, and this girl has a fancy new outfit, never been on her body before, and she's just a little too much, and he's kind of looking askance at her because he is a cowboy. He is a real cowboy, not these pretty boys that get hired for the dude ranch. After a while, Susan said, "Tell me, what is this thing about horses?" They've gone back to the dude ranch and they're walking out on the road. I thought about it a few more steps and said, "For this cowboy, the thing is, it's a lonely job, so you wind up talking to your horse off and on, day and night, telling him or her pretty near everything, which for them has to be mostly nonsense." For most of us, we might get one good horse a lifetime that stands far out above the rest. It's why we want to raise a good colt or filly from a foal by hand and want to be there its first day. My horse Straighter is that. Poor cheeks. But I'm still half a child in these matters. He's better than I am, and makes me want to be that good. Some folks, when their one real horse dies, get a shovel and go bury it themselves, and might or might not even let their best friend lend a hand, providing he can keep his mouth shut. Thinking about it, I guess I got a little worked up, because it felt like she was watching me pretty hard in the starlight. But then we walked on a ways, and I went on beyond myself. Maybe something in the ride and the night, maybe just walking along together slow, kind of slow, and all our talk about the nature of horses that got me to thinking about the lack of women in my life. All of a sudden, something had me recalling this girl I found once in a bordello down outside Agua Prieta, a place called Senora Rosalinda's Reposo. There the girl was among the frowsy others in their bright but skimpy costumes, a long-legged, sad-eyed thing in a tumult of dark hair, dirty bare feet, shapely in a torn nightie done up with safety pins that looked to be the result of someone's rough handling. Nobody there spoke English, or would admit they did, and the only thing I learned was her name, Isla. I guessed it meant island, and seemed to suit the isolation of this sad, lovely girl, just a speck on the ocean of life. I picked her because of how the boss lady held her face and slapped her cheeks. Not savage, but like how some treat their horse in a bid to command its attention and control the lesser one. Held her face like that and told her something I figured must mean it wouldn't hurt you to smile. I had the feeling that the madam had been slapping her pretty regular but wasn't achieving the desired effect. And right as the madam said what I thought might be about smiling, I noticed the girl's eyes fill with tears, the big fat drops roll down her cheeks and drip off her chin, running down the front of her nightgown. Isla didn't make a sound, just shivered a little. It looked like she wanted to stop, but couldn't. She spoke no English, and I didn't have the words to even ask what was wrong. Finally, I just took her by the hand, nodded to the madam, and the girl led me upstairs, showed me her little crib with wooden lattice screening a high, narrow window with a cage of lattice in place of a door. We went in, but could hardly turn around. It was so plain and bare and small. Just a bed and a nightstand with a pitcher and basin and a candle and a chair with a threadbare towel hung over the back of it. She lit the candle by the bed, but that was all. We sat side by side on the bed and held hands while I watched her tears flow down. The whole front of her nightie was stuck to her. So vulnerable, lovely, but sad. Isla was just like horses I'd known, innocent, but without a voice, with no way to say no, reminding me how I could always have been a little kinder than I'd been. Susan said, "Then what happened?" I said, after a little while, the old lady came along the hall with her cane and rattled the bars of our cage. She called out, "Despertar, Polita! Wake up, little chickie." So the girl stood up and hugged me, got my shirt all wet, 2 big damp spots from her breasts. Then she gave me a slight, salty, wet kiss on the mouth that I tasted more than felt. For all her sadness, I had only one thought. In this dry, barren country, her tears could only signify unquenchable life. I didn't even know how to count the Mexican money I had or add up what it meant. One of the vaqueros had traded me some pesos for the $40 American I had. Just tossed it at me. Could have been fortune, could have been nothing. There was no telling. I handed the girl the whole wad that filled both her hands, and she whispered gracias. Then I turned and left. When I got through the lattice to the hall, I looked back, couldn't help it, and saw the girl had stopped crying. That was all there was. Well, one thing, at least I knew the girl's name. But the boys on the next ranch where I worked the spring roundup said Rosalinda was Spanish slang for a gentle horse, which might have been why I wound up there in the first place. I crossed the border with these two young vaqueros from our outfit, clomping across that high wooden bridge in our boots. All night I just followed them around, and they went wherever they knew they'd be welcome and safe. To them, Senora Rosalinda's Reposo must have felt like home. Susan said, "What do you figure the girl's trouble was?" I said I couldn't tell. I was still kind of a wild thing myself, more than half horse, so mostly honest, and couldn't see a thing past her tears but the pain that had nothing to do with me. Susan took a breath and said, "What if the girl did that every night? Just turned on the faucet and never quit?" I said, "But that's just the thing. When I got up and left, she did quit." Susan looked up at me and said, "So it was about you, like it or not. Could have been all along, no matter who you turned out to be." I said, "I guess I don't want that to be the way of it. Even so, I wanted to do better, but that night I couldn't even start to make it right." Susan said, "You tell yourself the damage was done before you got there." And she was right. She called that whole bordello scene a dull-minded and hasty counterfeit of love, with ugly losers and no winners. Then she reached out and tugged my sleeve to break the spell if she could. We turned and walked back to the campfire. The fire had died down to a hot pit of coals and ash, and the rest of the crowd had turned in. By the glowing embers there, I leaned in to kiss her, but she beat me to it and smeared her lips across my cheek halfway to my ear. When we got untangled, we laughed a little and said goodnight and left it at that. I rolled out my bag on the fire and settled in. Catch me, Mr. Landlord Man, we'll be heading back to Dixieland this morning, 'cause it's moving day, moving day. Rip that carpet up off the floor, pick up your overcoat and get out the door, because it's moving day. Pack up your bags and get away. If you can't take the rent, you have to live out in a tent, because it's moving, no more grooving. Moving. Now I'm moving.